Hello, welcome everyone to Alliance for a Better Utah's, I believe this is our 8th annual virtual fundraiser. We're super excited to have you all here, even though we would normally wish that this would be an in-person event, as our breakfasts have been in the past. But thank you so much for being here and helping us end this crazy year. I was just thinking about when I looked back to the beginning of this year, the hopes and expectations we had for our work. We already knew it was going to be crazy. I mean, we were having an election where Donald Trump was one of the candidates, so there's a certain amount of craziness involved with that. But it turned out to be so much more. We've survived a pandemic together, an earthquake, a quasi-hurricane. So yeah, it's been quite a year. But we are excited to move forward past all this craziness and move into another year of work with Alliance for a Better Utah. And we're glad to have you all here helping support us in doing that. Just to start off, I wanted to thank our sponsors for tonight's event, particularly our presenting sponsors, the Cantor Family Foundation and Century Financial, and then the rest of our sponsors, Curry Up Now, the Peace and Possibility Project, Erica Rolston, Bob Archibald and Mary Ellen Navas, Art Lipson and Rochelle Kaplan, Jonathan and Sarah Klein, Love Communications, John and Cheryl Allen, Lori Hoffman, Shauna Bona, the Bensman Group and Associated Companies, Katie Lieberman, Andrea and Adam Himoff, Elaine Ellis, Boulder Mountain Lodge, Utah, Representative Patrice Arendt, Equality Utah, the Utah Women in Politics PAC, John and Carol Firmage, the Utah Education Association, Aspira Public Affairs, David Irvine, Patricia W. Christensen, Blueprint Public Affairs, Mary Ann Ellis, Jenny Wilson, Planned Parenthood Association of Utah, the Utah Cultural Alliance, Lisa Karikaburu, Bob and Dixie Huffner, and Mark and Michelle Rasich. We're so grateful for all of our sponsors for this year, for this year's event. And thank you to all of you, and thank you to all of our supporters, for everyone who's bought tickets, for everyone who's donated throughout this year. We really couldn't do it without you. Thank you to all of our staff members for helping organize this event and put it on, and for all the work that they've done throughout this year. Thank you also to our board of directors, many of whom are here tonight. We really couldn't do it without the community of people who support this organization. It really is an alliance coming together to make a difference in our state. So for tonight's event, I hope y'all will enjoy the program we put together. We are going to start off hearing from Andrea Himoff, the co-founder and executive director of Action Utah, which recently joined forces with the Better Utah Institute. After that, we will have a video, sort of a year in review of Alliance. Well, not a year in review anymore. We stopped calling it that. Apologies, Katie. We'll have a video, after which Katie Matheson, our communications director, will speak after that. So here we go to Andrea.
Hi, Chase. Thanks so much for that introduction and for the opportunity to speak tonight. 4 years ago, there was a contentious election that sparked community members from across the state to get involved like they never had before, because they suddenly realized that they wanted to have so much more of a voice to be better represented, to have elected officials and policy decisions reflect the wants and needs of the people. That moment lit a fire inside of me and also inside of my dear friend and Better Utah board member, Katie Lieberman. Katie and I were just two working moms who cared about issues, but weren't terribly civically engaged and felt like we wanted to do more to make a difference. So in the days after the election, we put together a community meeting to talk about the implications of the election on a number of different issues. And before we knew it, 300 people showed up, which, as you know, is a lot for Salt Lake City. And all of them asked us the same question. They asked us, what can we, everyday, ordinary people, do to get involved to make a difference? And as I saw the desire of so many people to get their voices heard, I realized something bigger needed to be done in Utah to empower people like this. So I wrote a business plan and I pitched it to Katie, and a few weeks later, Action Utah was born with the mission to grow civic engagement in Utah. Now, 4 years later, we are excited to announce that we're joining forces with the Better Utah Institute to work toward that mission together. And over these past 4 years, I've become all the more convinced about the power of civic engagement and the importance of growing the number and diversity of people who are informed and engaged across our state. Because without engaged residents, elected officials would not know the will of the people. Significant policies would not get the critical support they need to pass or the critical opposition they need to fail. There would be no new candidates running for office and creating competitive races, and there would be no accountability for elected officials to their constituents. But the great news is that any Utahn of any age, religion, ethnicity, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, physical location, or even citizenship status can make a difference. And believe me, I have seen it all on Capitol Hill. Like a polygamist husband from southern Utah seeking to decriminalize polygamy, or Native Americans dancing in the Capitol Rotunda to draw attention and action to the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women, or a 6-year-old reptile enthusiast testifying in a committee hearing in support of his favorite candidate for the new state reptile, or a housewife learning to lobby legislators for the first time because she cared deeply about suicide prevention, or a young gay man who told his painful personal story to help sway the hearts and minds of legislators, the lieutenant governor and governor to end the abusive practice of conversion therapy, or 2 brand new advocates who started a nonprofit to fight for equal rights for women, a retiree who learned the legislative process and tracked and testified for a list of bills during a legislative session, or a passionate college student who ran an election campaign for a new legislator and then became that legislator's intern during the general session. Some of these people are just like you. And some of these people are totally different from you, and that's important too. But the point is that without participation by the people, there is no real democracy, no government of the people, by the people, for the people in our state or nation. At Action Utah, we passed some pretty significant policies over the years, including the first climate resolution ever in a red state. But more important than our policy wins were the people behind them who made them happen. Like the high school students from Logan who proposed that climate resolution and spent more than a year holding thoughtful, non-judgmental, one-on-one meetings with legislators to change the conversation about climate change in Utah and grow support for their resolution. Or the single mom who helped convince legislators to double the funding for an affordable housing bill by coming to the Capitol with her 1-year-old baby to show legislators that homelessness can look like an employed single parent taking care of her kids and her aging father on a salary that doesn't support stable housing. Or the thousands of Utahns who have written personalized emails to their legislators to sway votes on bills that impact our communities. The truth is that if we're not out advocating for what we want and need, it may be that no one is. Or it may be that someone is out there advocating against what we want and need. Our voices matter, and it's essential that we learn to use them. This summer, thousands of people took to the streets, despite the risks of the pandemic, to speak up for police reform and racial justice. How many of those people also contacted their local and state officials? the very people who are charged with making the changes that people want to see. How much more powerful would their actions be if they took their engagement to the next level, or if a few of them ran for office? Civic engagement could not be more important for shaping a society that is inclusive, with decision makers who work for the people, creating policies that benefit more people. In fact, research shows that communities with higher levels of civic engagement have lower unemployment, stronger schools, better physical health, and more responsive governments. Civic engagement truly improves our communities and strengthens our democracy. Data also shows that civic engagement benefits us as individuals, improving our mental and physical health and helping us feel more connected to our communities with stronger social ties. But civic engagement has decreased across the nation over the past several decades, with barriers like a lack of civics education, overwhelm, and the opacity of our political and election systems. And that's where Action Utah and the Better Utah Institute come in. By joining forces, our two organizations are coming together to forge a single, more robust, more efficient organization that can help community members by improving the way that they can access civic engagement and by giving them the tools they need to make a difference. Utah needs strong and diverse leaders and advocates, but we won't have a meaningful community voice or high-quality candidates if we don't cultivate engagement in people, starting from the ground up. With our combined resources and expertise, the Better Utah Institute can teach Utahns about civic engagement and empower them to make a difference. Katie and I are looking forward to staying involved in an advisory capacity to oversee the continuation and growth of our work. And we're thrilled that our amazing staff member, Melissa Nelson-Stipik, has joined the Better Utah staff as the new Civic Engagement Coordinator. But we also recognize that Better Utah is bringing on a giant new load of work with this transition. And this load will not be sustainable without an increase in financial resources. And so I want to say a quick plug to encourage those of you who supported both Better Utah and Action Utah in the past to consider transferring your Action Utah gifts over to the Better Utah Institute as well. And to those of you who already support the Better Utah Institute or Better Utah, to consider increasing your gift to help grow this important work in civic engagement. And lastly, I wanted to say a big thanks to the Better Utah board and staff for their willingness and enthusiasm about bringing Action Utah into its fold to build a better Utah together. Thank you.
The story of Utah is a story of perseverance. When the Great Depression decimated America, the people organized. A Utahn crafted a New Deal, and across America, neighborhoods got back to work. When families struggled to pay medical bills, the people organized and made sure that everyone, regardless of zip code or income, was able to take care of those most dear to them. And when Indigenous voters were disenfranchised, the people organized and made sure everyone had access to the ballot. In stories of our past, Utahns of different races and from different neighborhoods have pressed forward for their communities. As we face our future, we have to answer the question of what kind of Utah we want to leave the next generation. Deep within each of us is the fortitude to press forward and fulfill our responsibility to make the earth and life better than we found it. At Alliance for a Better Utah, we show up for
education,
our planet,
LGBTQ+ rights, fair representation,
and our state.
I show up so that my kids and other kids can have the freedom to run and play and breathe clean air.
I show up for immigrants, for community, family, and youth.
I show up for the LGBTQ+ community, not only to protect my rights, but to make sure that everyone feels that they have a place in our community and are equal under the law.
I show up for my friends, my family, and my community to help bring us all together and work towards a brighter future.
I show up for LDS women to have politics that actually reflects our values.
I show up for fair representation because government should reflect the will of all the people.
Utahns will persevere because it's the way we've always done things. It's how we care for our neighbors, and because we know that we're moving forward to a future that will work for all of us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Matheson. I'm the communications director here at Alliance for a Better Utah. And what that means for an accountability and progressive advocacy organization in a state like Utah is that I spend most of my time annoying people, whether they're politicians, whether it's people who think I'm too optimistic, people who think I'm too pessimistic, and everything in between. Give me one sec. For the past month, I apologize, we had a little tech issue. For the past month, my colleagues and I have spent a lot of time fielding questions from people who want us to interpret the 2020 election results. People have questions about what the results mean and what it will look like for the state and our country going forward. And what I take from this is that people are worried, people are anxious, and they're tired. And they're tired from the last 4 years. And frankly, I think a lot of us are going to need to take some time to just breathe. But for me, I'm honestly feeling a lot of hope for our future. And this isn't me being naive. This is me celebrating the truth that our institutions held, that we repudiated authoritarianism at the ballot box. And starting next month, America will make history with our first woman and woman of color vice president. As I look over the past year at Alliance for a Better Utah, I'm really proud of two particular projects that we worked on. One was the absolute privilege that my colleagues and I had to work with a coalition started by Representative Sandra Hollins to help remove slavery from Utah's state constitution. As an organization, we worked on messaging with an emphasis on messages that bring us together across ideologies, races, religions, and geography. We put forward a unifying message of shared values, and we worked directly on the traditional and digital media campaign. In the end, the amendment to remove slavery from Utah's constitution won with more votes than any other candidate or amendment on the 2020 ballot in Utah. And with 80% of the votes in favor of the amendment, it passed by a larger margin than similar measures in other states like Colorado and Nebraska. So go Utah. And then the second is earlier this year during the 2020 legislative session, before we were all Zooming into meetings, we here at Alliance for a Better Utah worked with allies to fight against bad anti-choice bills while also working to expand how Utahns think about what pro-family laws actually look like. We worked to build a narrative around air quality, education, equal pay, in vitro fertilization, healthcare, and childcare access. And the truth that all of these things must be considered when we talk about caring for families, not just the narrow view that is so often expressed in our state. I'm really grateful to my teammates and grateful to all of you who are here tonight for supporting the work that we do and helping us in this work as we build towards a better future Utah. I have hope for our future because I believe in the people who are working to make it better for all of us. So thank you again so much. And next up is Josh Cantor, Alliance for a Better Utah's founder and board chair. Thank you.
Hi. Oh, sorry. All of a sudden I was there. Well, first of all, please remind me never to follow Andrea and Katie again, because this is not going to be quite as eloquent as either of the two of them. But good evening. As most of you obviously know, my name is Josh Cantor. I'm the founder and board chair of the Alliance for Urban Utah, and I'd like to add my thanks to all of you for being here this evening. I know we're all a bit zoomed out, so we're particularly grateful that you're willing to spend a little bit of your evening with us here to support our work tonight. Of course, I'd also like to thank our board and staff, without whom we simply wouldn't be where we are. I'm grateful every day for their friendship, their leadership, and their counsel. When we picked this date for the event tonight, we knew that we would know the outcome of the November 3rd election, and we all hoped that, of course, would mean a Biden victory. But I don't think anyone said to themselves, yeah, that's great, let's do it the day after the Electoral College meets, because that's an important day in our collective political minds. Another reminder of what a crazy year it's been and what a crazy time we're living in. We have a short program tonight, and I know you're not here to hear from me, so I won't do my usual song and dance about Better Utah, but I hope you know our work. I hope you're proud of it. If you don't, please follow us, join us, root for us, support us, whatever you feel like doing. It's hard for me to believe that we're almost 10 years into this experiment, and I feel like our work is more critical than ever. As anyone who knows me knows, I'll spend any time any of you want talking about what we do, how we do it, why we do it, whatever you want. So just drop me a note or give me a call anytime. But for now, I want to get to our conversation with our special guest. I know I'm really excited to hear from her, and I hope you are too. With that, it's my pleasure to not only introduce, but to lead a conversation this evening with our guest of honor, Kate Kendall. Many of you no doubt know Kate or are well familiar with Kate and her work at the National Center for Lesbian Rights, a national legal organization committed to advancing the civil and human rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people and their families through litigation, public policy, advocacy, and public education. What some of you may not know is that Kate is a hometown girl, having grown up right here in Utah, so she knows our story and our plight as well as anyone. She received her law degree here at the University of Utah, and after a few years practicing corporate law, she turned her eye towards civil rights advocacy and became the first staff attorney for the American Civil Liberties Union of Utah, litigating many high-profile cases focusing on all aspects of civil liberties, including reproductive rights, prisoners' rights, free speech, the rights of LGBTQ people, and the intersection of church and state. From the ACLU, Kate joined NCLR as legal director and was named executive director 2 years later. Under her leadership, NCLR's programs, budget, and impact grew exponentially. And during Kate's 22-year career with NCLR, the issues facing the LGBTQ community, the safety of LGBTQ youth, violence facing transgender women of color, draconian immigration policy, criminal justice reform, and the freedom to marry took center stage in our nation's discussion of civil rights and justice for the LGBTQ community. And what I'm sure was a surprise to many, Kate left NCLR at the end of 2018 and accepted the role of interim legal director at the Southern Poverty Law Center in August 2019. Kate is a nationally recognized spokesperson and has an active voice in major media. Among other awards and recognitions, Kate was named a woman who could be president by the League of Women Voters of San Francisco, a hero of National LGBT History Month. She's been named one of California's top 100 attorneys. She won the Del Martin Phyllis Lyon Marriage Equality Award from Equality California, and she's won the National LGBT Bar Association's Dan Bradley Award. Okay, hopefully I didn't use all our time. So with that, I hope you'll all join me in welcoming Kate and thanking her for being with us here tonight. Because of our Zoom format this evening, we've chosen to ask Kate to participate in a bit of a fireside chat. Here's my fireplace, no fire, but fireplace. And rather than our usual, doing that rather than our usual keynote speech. So Kate, welcome. I don't know if you want to say hello and then we'll just jump right in.
I just want to say this has been the highlight of my year, and it's been some year, but to be able to be in Utah again and to be able to participate in this conversation and to elevate the work of Alliance for a Better Utah. You have made Utah better. And it's a place I could maybe imagine living again because of the work that you've done. So this is a joy for me to have this conversation, Josh. I'm looking forward to it. And I really appreciate the supporters in the room supporting the work to assure that Utah is a place of justice and security and dignity and safety for everyone.
Excellent, thank you. And thanks again for being here. So let me start this conversation with a question that I guess I struggle with quite a bit. As someone who's worked in the LGBT space for so long, I'm curious if you can look at Martin Luther King's arc of the moral universe, where would we be at this time in our history for the LGBTQ movement?
Wow, that is such a great question. And I actually love that framing because I think it's really important to understand and to situate the LGBTQ movement and where we are now in the firmament of other civil rights movements, because it's important. Sometimes we can see the glass half empty, but if you situate our movement in the place of other civil rights movements, and of course LGBTQ people are everywhere, so all of these movements are our civil rights movements, you realize how far we've come, and the rapidity with which we saw social change is breathtaking. I mean, in the lifetime of my college senior son, we went from being outlaws and having our love criminalized and same-sex sexual intimacy criminalized, and the idea of our relationships being recognized legally laughable, to ending laws that criminalize same-sex sexual intimacy, an embrace of our relationships, a recognition that our love is every bit as important as anyone else's love, and therefore the right to marry was secured at the US Supreme Court. And just the representation of LGBTQ identity across an entire spectrum that includes race and religion and socioeconomic status and geography, it is nothing short of breathtaking. That's not to say we don't have a tremendous amount more to do, but in 20 years and just a little bit of change, we went from being vilified and seen as criminals and irretrievably damaged to a part of civil society and to being embraced by, no, certainly not everyone, we understand that, but embraced by those who were willing to approach the issue of our identity and who we were with somewhat of an open mind, to be fully accepted, and not just accepted, but even celebrated. That is shocking, and I do not think has been replicated in any other civil rights fight.
Let me expand that question a little bit. I think if we look at the perspective of all progressive issues or many progressive issues, I kind of think about, I don't know if everybody remembers the old arcade game where you shoot a water gun and either the balloon goes up or the horses, ride. How do you see all of these movements sort of ebbing and flowing, whether that's the LGBTQ movement, other racial justice issues, even things like healthcare and abortion rights and reproductive rights? How do you see, I suppose, all of those things sort of jockeying for position as we kind of march forward?
That's a perfect follow-up question to your first question. So you've done this before. You know what you're doing. You know what you're doing. Because with the progress that we've made as a movement and as LGBTQ plus identified individuals, there comes a responsibility. And the responsibility is, first of all, to recognize how far we've come and how quickly, then to recognize where we still have work to do. And then finally, to look around and recognize all the work that is left unfinished by previous civil rights movements. I particularly direct these comments to white LGBTQ individuals because when I grew up in Utah and went to law school, I grew up Mormon, so I'm fond of saying good girl gone bad. And through my entire career, up until I started at the ACLU, I was not out in any of my jobs, except for my very first internship in law school with the iconic and legendary Jane Marquardt, who I know is in this room with us, who is really one of the reasons that I went to law school. So Jane, it's all your fault. And Jane and Tammy have been tremendous supporters of mine. And Jane really was a very early mentor who encouraged me when I didn't think I was smart enough to go to law school. She said, "Oh, you should definitely go to law school." But other than Jane, I was never out in any job that I ever had. And I was able to get away with and to have that passing privilege of people just assuming that I was not gay, because that the dominant heterosexual narrative is that we're absent and we're erased. Very few people of color have passing privilege. You walk out of your house as a Black person in Utah, and from the moment you walk out of your home, you deal with whatever people's reactions are based on their own prejudice, their own bigotry, their own racism. Even if it's subtle, even if it's quiet, even if it's something that even people won't recognize that they possess. That means that in this particular moment where we've gained so much, that we have a responsibility for those of us who have benefited from passing privilege. I would have never gotten my first job out of law school at what was then the largest firm in Utah if they'd known I was a lesbian. I probably would have been hired by the ACLU, and I came out early in my job at the ACLU, but there are very few jobs that would have been available in the mid-1980s for someone who was openly queer. So we have a special responsibility, I think, to look at these other movements and to not think of them as jockeying for position, but to understand that these are fellow travelers. These are our brothers and sisters. And of course, there are queer people in every single one of these populations and these movements. And to say, whoa, I benefited because I was able to deploy passing privilege and determine on my own terms who knew about me, who didn't know about me, and keep jobs or get jobs because I wasn't honest about who I was. For those who don't have that privilege, we have to reshape and remake this culture so that race and racism and white supremacy are fully dealt with, are fully addressed, are fully unpacked, and are fully dismantled.
Thanks. We certainly have a lot of work still to do. I think, Kate, also, you just touched on it, and I'll continue down the same theme for a second. You have a particular perspective because of your work here in Utah. You're from Utah. You were the first staff attorney, I think, with the ACLU. So I guess in a similar vein, what's your perspective on the arc of Utah's progress? How is it? I assume you're watching from afar. I know you have family back here. What do you think of Utah's progress and trajectory since your time back here at the ACLU?
It's not the same Utah. It's not the same Utah. I mean, the ACLU might still be the most hated organization in the state, which we were. Every year, we were voted the most hated organization. I took it as a
We're trying to take that over, by the way, but okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually think ABU is in the running for that title. It used to be you could fit in a relatively, medium-sized conference room, some of the key activist organizations who were working to change the climate in Utah, to broaden the representation of who had power, to broaden the representation of who experienced true justice and meaningful justice. That has really shifted. Carrie Galloway from Planned Parenthood is in the room with us as well. I saw her name, and Planned Parenthood was one of the few, along with the ACLU and a handful of other organizations and some religious leaders who, we would caucus together and figure out how are we going to try to move a progressive agenda against enormous odds. We didn't have representatives like you have now. I mean, occasionally you had like a Jackie Biskupski or a Scott McCoy, but it was rare to have elected officials who actually embraced LGBTQ identity, LGBT constituents, and who really saw LGBTQ people as fully equal and valued. That's completely shifted. Not in all places in Utah, for sure, but it's shifted and it's changed because people came back after growing up in Utah, or they moved to Utah, or people who've been there all of their lives, continuing to do the fight and continuing to try to make change, were joined by others who really decided, we love this state. We love where we live. What we want and what we seek and what we want to create is a climate where everyone enjoys opportunity, free from stigma, with full dignity and appreciation of who they are as human beings. And I feel like what's happening in Utah, when I come back and visit now, and I spend a lot of time in Salt Lake and also down in Spanish Fork, where my oldest daughter lives. I still spend time in Ogden, where my stepmom lives. it feels different. And that we still have a lot of work to do. There's no doubt about that. That's why you're holding this event. But it's not the Utah that I left in 1994. And that's a good thing.
So I feel like there's a continuation of this theme. And I guess, again, kind of going back to, there's this push and pull in progress of any kind, not just politics, political progress and these movements. We've come through, I guess I would call it a push moment, right? And so I guess how do you look at, and how serious do you feel the damage is, if you feel it's damage, of what's happened over these last 4 years through the Trump administration, and what we're looking at going forward, given the reshaping of the Supreme Court?
Well, there's no reason to sugarcoat this. I mean, we're in a really dangerous moment. And look, and even you don't have to look at the last 4 years. Look at the last 4 weeks. This administration has pounded everything they can into the guardrails of our democracy. Now, the guardrails have held, but they are a twisted wreck. And undoing that damage, instilling faith in democratic institutions and leaders, is going to be a very long slog. I love that Joe Biden is going to be president and Kamala Harris, my own senator, fantastic human being, is going to be vice president. But the work they have ahead of them, even if we didn't have COVID, the work they had ahead of them would be enormous, and an undertaking that I wouldn't wish on anyone. So what they're going to need is we're all going to need to be defenders of key democratic institutions. And we're also going to need to be more bold and radical than we've ever had to be before. I mean, it's why I support the idea of expanding the size of the Supreme Court. We had a stolen seat. We have illegitimate seats. We have a court that is totally riven with partisanship. Most of the majority justices at this point are complete partisan hacks. Yes, they may stop themselves from going right over the cliff, as they did in the Bostick decision, where they held that Title VII does protect against gender identity and sexual orientation against employment discrimination. But in many other ways, dark money in politics, gerrymandering, suppression of voting rights, they will endorse all of that. The only way to correct that is to do something we've never even seriously considered since Roosevelt tried to do it in the mid-1930s, expanding the size of the court. So we're going to have to move this administration, which is going to be pretty centrist, to be somewhat more bold and radical, not just to protect democratic institutions, but to really make real the racial reconciliation conversation that's been ignited in this country. And if we don't fulfill the promise of racial reconciliation and dismantling white supremacy and really coming to terms for how we got rich as a country on the backs of enslaved people, and really atone for that, we set the stage for some other Trump. It could be Trump himself in 2024, or it could be some other pretender. We have to take seriously that we are in a revolutionary moment, and it means we have to bring everything to bear to make real the revolution.
I guess it's easy to look at these movements, and particularly the work you've done, at kind of this big, broad national, on this big, broad national stage. So I'm curious, there's a lot of chatter earlier about Sean Reyes, our Attorney General, joining the Texas complaint to the Supreme Court. One of Better Utah's early actions was actually bringing down one of our other attorneys general, a guy named John Swallow.
Oh, I remember that. I saw that. I watched that.
So I guess coming down to a more local level, can you talk a little bit about how do you see the role of state and municipal governments in these big progressive movements as they move to that national stage?
That is such an important question, because when I came up in as a political observer and activist, everything that really mattered happened at the federal level. In some ways, because there was nothing you could do at the local level. I mean, Utah was Utah, and we've got 94, 95, 96% Republicans in every position, it didn't really feel like there was much you could do. Although I will say, I cut my teeth, when Scott Matheson was governor in Utah. So there was a moment, we had a House of God moment in Utah where you actually could be a Democrat and be elected to statewide office. But it's now the case, and I think you see this in Georgia. You see it in some of the local, you see it in like the DA in LA, for example. The understanding the importance of what happens locally is how you make real change. It impacts what happens nationally. So I've told activists for a very long time, and I've told donors this too. As you think about how you spend your time and how you allocate your giving, do something super hyper local, municipal, neighborhood, then do something statewide, then do something national. All those things matter, and they all interrelate, and never more so than now. Never more so than now. I actually do think that part of the revolutionary moment is that we've now barely stopped ourselves from going over a cliff, and it is because of local grassroots activism, voting, registering people to vote, getting folks to turn out to vote. We have to relearn that lesson again and again and really invest our time and our energy into what's happening locally and understand that actually trickles up and that we have more power locally than I think people previously thought that they did.
So staying, I guess, a little bit on that theme, and obviously having worked for the ACLU chapter here in Utah, do you have what do you feel is the role of organizations like Alliance for Better Utah in that landscape and in that local kind of on the ground work?
Well, you answer the question I get all the time. The question I get all the time when I speak about how people should engage is, well, what can I do? And what I would say is be a part of Alliance for a Better Utah. Get involved, get engaged, volunteer, write a check. It can be Alliance for a Better Utah, it can be the ACLU of Utah, it can be Equality Utah. I mean, obviously multiple organizations work together to, and I love that you're merging organizations too, to figure out, you're better than the sum of your parts as you come collectively together, because you are up against a pretty monolithic power structure. So, you've gotta align, and you've got to ally, and you've got to work together, and you've got to collaborate. So what you provide is a portal for people to exercise their desire and need to get involved and to make change. So, you've answered your own question. What people can do is get involved with Alliance for a Better Utah and be a part of seeing that change happen and being agents in making that change possible.
Perfect. Thanks. Hopefully somebody put a donate link in the chat while you were doing that. Sorry.
I'm sure somebody you should.
Let me shift directions kind of one more time. It's astounding, I'm sure, to many people. It certainly is to me that 74 million, leave aside Utah's voting, 74 million Americans were perfectly okay with Donald Trump and voted for him. We clearly have our work cut out for us. As you've said, we clearly have a messaging war. Our side, if we're taking sides, likes to believe that we're right. And obviously on a moral sense, I believe we are. But I'm curious, what are we getting wrong? What do you think our side needs to do better, and that we're losing half the country in this messaging war?
Oh, wow. Well, if I have the right answer to that question, I'm not paid enough. I think
you should probably charge for it.
I think it's a really complicated question. But what I can say is, I think this is a multi-generational failure. In fact, I think it's a failure it's probably a 2 centuries failure. We had an opportunity during emancipation and Reconstruction to really atone for what we did as a nation and on the backs of whom we did it, and to really empower particularly Black individuals and communities to thrive and to really take seriously the threat of racism and racial prejudice, but we didn't. And we allowed it to continue to grow, to rampage. We allowed lynching. We allowed communities to be decimated who were where Black businesses had been built and Black communities had thrived. We turned a blind eye because we fundamentally never came to terms with that we have a white supremacist superstructure. And so if we don't really address that, then we allow the grievance of a huge number, obviously, of white folks and some folks of color, but mostly overwhelmingly white folks, and overwhelmingly white folks who themselves feel aggrieved because they feel like they are still missing out on opportunities for a better life and for economic security. But so I think that's the first thing. We really have to have an honest conversation about the endurance and the intentionality of racism. You can't grow up white in this culture and not be racist. You just can't. You're intended to be racist in order to support white supremacy. You can unlearn it. You can practice anti-racism every day, but you can never fully escape it because it is baked into how we are supposed to function as white people in this society. So that's the first thing we have to do, be honest about that. And I'm still willing, even though it's hard for me, but I'll tell you what, I started reading Alicia Garza's book. Alicia is one of the founders of Black Lives Matter. Her new book, she wrote her book, first book, a memoir. It just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's The Purpose of Power. And I just started reading it. And it made me humble because I'm pretty much ready to block every single person that I know who voted for Trump. I mean, I'm tired. I'm tired of having a conversation, trying to reach people where I just so fundamentally disagree with their worldview. But even Alicia Garza is not in that place. And if she's not in that place, then I don't have the luxury of being in that place. And I don't want to freight her as a Black woman or any other person of color with having to still engage in those conversations and the belief that people can and will change. I need to take that on as my fight because of my relative privilege. And we all need to take that on. So continuing to have the difficult conversations, I've learned, my mom was a devout Mormon until the day she died, and she loved me fiercely and supported me 1000%. So she's my example of you never know who you might be able to reach. So we have to continue to have those conversations, but we also need people to understand that this is intended to be this way. It is intended that people who are most marginal and vulnerable and disadvantaged will fight among themselves. That is intended. It is how it is supposed to be. It is the grievance that this administration and Trump himself stoked well before he was elected president of the United States. And I think we're having those conversations more than I've ever seen before, but we need to double down on that conversation if we're going to come out of this on the other side with those 74 million people. Look, we're always going to have 30 million who would vote for him no matter what. But if we can make it 30 million and not 74 million, we will have fundamentally changed how this country deals with issues, particularly of race and injustice.
Thank you. So I'm sure people are curious after such an esteemed and long career at NCLR. Can you talk for a second just about what caused you to leave and now how you're finding things over at the Southern Poverty Law Center?
Sure. Well, I had thought about leaving my position at NCLR multiple times. I mean, 22 years is a long time to be in a job, I mean, I'm not, my parents could be retired with a gold watch and all of that. But, that's a long time. And it's certainly a long time to be, to lead a nonprofit organization. So when I left, I think I was the second longest tenured executive director in the LGBT movement of an organization. But every time I thought about leaving, something amazing was happening. Like, we were taking the marriage case to the Supreme Court. We were beating back and winning on, bans on conversion therapy. And then Trump got elected, and I didn't want to leave right after Trump got elected because I didn't want to look like I was running from what would be one of the biggest fights of our lives. But finally, as I was, getting older, recognizing what was in the best interest of NCLR and recognizing that I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to vacate a seat and hopefully having that seat leading NCLR someone not only both younger, but with a different life experience. And that totally happened. Amani Rupert Gordon is our new executive director, ran a Black social services organization in Chicago, which is where she is from. I've known Amani for years. She is fantastic and exactly the kind of leadership that we need to see at the helm of queer organizations in this country. So I vacated, but if I hadn't vacated the seat, she wouldn't be there. So when I took the job at Southern Poverty Law Center on an interim basis, it was supposed to last 6 months, and now it's been 18 months. But SPLC has gone through its own roiling transformation, very well documented departure of the founder and president, Morris Dees, a lot of scandal and headlines that obviously can create a really tough culture for an organization. But I'm so committed to the work SPLC does around all the issues we've been talking about: over-incarceration, detention, immigration, and really now centering with our new CEO, centering being deeply, deeply anti-racist and dismantling white supremacist structures. So it's very much a part of the work that I love doing and that I think is so important to do. And we're an organization that is very well resourced and making changes in one of the hardest regions to make change in the country, and that is the Deep South. So I'm loving it and feel yet once again, I get to engage in work that is catalytic and change making, and love the people that I work with and get to watch and admire them every day. So I'm once again in a pinch me moment where this has been my career since I started the ACLU, and I've been very, very lucky to find myself in situation after situation where I'm watching people make great change and assisting them in doing it.
Well, Kate, I am so grateful, as all of us are, for you coming out here, at least virtually, this evening and spending it with us. We're very, very grateful. And more importantly than that, frankly, for me, I'm so grateful for a lifetime of service to these causes and issues. It's just tremendous to see that kind of dedication to advocacy and to pushing other people's rights forward. And the world is a better place for having you in it. And so we're grateful. And I'd like to just leave you a few minutes, if you'd like it, to leave us with any parting words. And then I'll turn things back over to Chase to take us to our next step. But thank you for being here.
Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate that. I've loved this conversation. I wish it could be in person. I'm still not ever going to adjust to the fact that this is all virtual. And I want to thank everyone for being a part of this and for your support of Better Utah. One thing that I will leave you with is, when Trump got elected, we were all bereft, and we've been continued. We feel like there's never been a bottom as we've endured this 4 years. It's really important to understand where we've been and I'm going to end the way you started, Josh, to situate ourselves. I think about the marriage fight, for example, where we think, it was laughable that same-sex couples would have the freedom to marry, I think even 10 years ago. And we just gained that right in 2015. You go back another decade, and COVID is sort of reminiscent of this. During the height of the HIV epidemic, when gay men, including several of my very close friends in Utah, were dying, Larry Speaks, who was Reagan's press secretary at the time, was asked at a press conference, what is the administration's response to all these gay men who are dying in San Francisco and New York and Los Angeles? Speaks' reaction, he laughed, mocking the idea that the administration should even care about the fact that gay men were dying. So out of nothing, literally nothing, and with no government support, our community built an infrastructure to save our men. and others impacted by HIV. So we have muscle memory for this moment. We have muscle memory, and we can build our way out of this frightening moment that we're in, this fraught moment that we're in, this divisive moment that we're in. We've done it before, and I know you will all do it again. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much, Josh and Kate, for that incredible conversation. And thank you so much for everyone else who has spoken so far at the event today. So to announce the winners of our opportunity drawings, I just used a random name generator. The winner for our warm opportunity drawing, which is a week getaway to, sorry, Kate made me cry right before I had to come back on stage. So the winner of our warm opportunity drawing, which is a week getaway to Palm Springs, is Peter Metcalf. And the winner of our cold opportunity drawing, which is a week to Steamboat Springs, Colorado, is Mark St. Andre. So we will be contacting both of you with the details of your getaways. And thank you so much for everyone who purchased entries and supporting the work of Alliance for a Better Utah and the Better Utah Institute. Our final speaker for tonight will be Darlene McDonald. She joined the Better Utah board about a year ago, and up until today, when Andrea Himoff joined our Better Utah Institute board, she was the newest member of our board. So Darlene, here you go.
Thank you, Chase. I just want to say, Kate, that was absolutely amazing. I close to tears, just as Chase was. When I was asked to join the board for Alliance for a Better Utah, I have to admit I was tremendously just proud. It was a very proud moment for me, and just tremendously honored to be a part of this organization. An organization that a part of its mission statement is to hold politicians accountable. When I got involved with politics, I've always been interested and I've always followed, but never took the step to actually get involved. And when I got involved with politics, it was because around 2007, 2018, the economic crash that happened right before President Obama came into office. And at the time, I was the student of economics, so I was following it quite intensely. And I was paying attention to what the politicians and state legislators and federal Congress people were saying about the economic crisis. And I was appalled because they were not telling the truth. That's when I got involved and stayed involved on many levels, because it is important that we tell the truth. And I know that people say, yeah, well, politicians don't tell the truth. They are required, or we should demand that they tell the truth to their constituents. And if they don't, we hold them accountable. So being a part of an organization where that is their mission statement is a tremendous honor for me. As I've gotten to know the board and people on the board, another thing that makes me just tremendously proud to be a part of this organization is that they walk the talk. I've done a lot of protesting over the last year, as many of you know, ever since the murder of Mr. George Floyd. We have been out there almost every weekend. And I have walked alongside many of you who are on the board, many of you who are on this call and participating tonight. We walk arm in arm, hand in hand down the street continuously. I feel like we have been going at this for the last, well, I want to say 4 years, but probably longer than that. We have been going hard and we have been going strong. And someone, I believe Katie had mentioned being tired. Yeah, we are tired, but, and like Kate said, we have some work to do when it comes to doing something about the disinformation, the misinformation, and educating people about just what's happening in politics and what's happening in the world, and making sure that we were able to maintain and hold on to our democracy. That is the work that I'm going to be committed to going forward. And that's the work that I'm going to be committed to, is being a part of this board. I know that some of the staff for Alliance for a Better Utah has put the link to donate in the chat. If you could find within yourself to donate to this organization, they do good work. And I am proud to be associated with them. I am proud to retweet when they go after Sean Reyes, because it is necessary. It is necessary to hold our elected officials accountable. And as we move into 2021, we're going to keep our shoes on, our walking shoes on, and we're going to stay out there. We're going to keep the work up. So thank you very much for asking me to speak, and thank you very much for joining us today. I will turn it over to Chase.
Thank you so much, Darlene. And thank you again for everyone who has attended tonight. Thank you for supporting the work of Alliance for a Better Utah and the work of the Better Utah Institute. Once again, we couldn't do it without you, without the support of our community. I hope you have a great rest of your evening. I hope the rest of 2020 is great as well. Happy holidays. And thank you so much. I hope you all have a great evening. Bye.